Hey guys, Tarke here. I wanted to do like a mini unique item reveal, a little bit of a public service announcement about the Grand Spectrum jewels that Lifting Nerd were announced. Also, you probably noticed I've changed my camera angle because you've got triggered by my nose, so hopefully you get somewhat less triggered by my nose now. Feels good, man. So, Lifting did a really great reveal of some new unique jewels, which we added in Prophecy. I'm going to talk about the effects of the jewels on build making rather than the jewels themselves, and I highly recommend you go check out his channel and watch the video before you listen to the rest of this. So I'll leave the link to this below, watch that, come back, and then you're all clued up. Right, so assuming that everyone knows what I'm talking about, 3 new unique jewels were added. They're the Grand Spectrum jewels, and basically they have a unique effect which is multiplied by the more you have of them. If you still haven't watched it, go watch Lifting's video, it's really good. People are planning their builds around these particular jewels, and because of the very nature of the jewels, you want as many of them as possible. Now, this is somewhat troublesome when you look at the skill tree. Now, the reason why it's somewhat good and somewhat bad is you type in jewel and you go, well, there's loads in the tree. You can easily get a tree which has about 8 of them without being too suboptimal. You can easily make a tree with about 15 of them, and it's fairly optimal-ish. Past that, you're really stretching. Now, until we know how you acquire these items, they're very hard to evaluate. If they're incredibly easy, very accessible, so let's say very low drop rate, very high drop rate, and they can come at any sort of level, then they'll probably be relatively expensive at the start of the league while they're hyped, and then that price will diminish with time. If they're gated behind, certain encounters, certain quest chains, certain prophecies, like long prophecy tiers, the Pale Council, then they'll be hard to come by, and if you need 10 plus, 15 plus, 18 of them for your build, and they only really function when they're in very large numbers, you have something of a problem. So if you are planning a build around these particular jewels, then go ahead, but be aware that your build might potentially be incredibly expensive. Even if they were to only cost 10 to 20 chaos a pop, assuming that, somewhat rare-ish, that's pretty cheap, right? But when you need a minimum of like 10 for them to be worthwhile, you're looking at 100 to 200 chaos without any items, just for your jewels. And you'd say, well, but Tarke, a best in slot jewel, no one has best in slot jewels to make their build work. They're like good things, and you use yourself with 5 chaos jewels, and eventually you buy 1 or 2 exalted worth jewels. Very interesting, but please, please, please do not make it your first build of the league. If you do that, you could severely gimp yourself in the long run. So think about that, guys. Right, jumping ahead, this is a new unique silver flask, which was revealed in just the last couple of hours. Now, people are often in 2 minds about the flask, at least from the initial stuff I've read. People are saying this is incredibly well balanced, this is perfect, or a bit eh. I think this is actually very powerful. I think this is in a bubble, like ignoring the rest of the game, nearly OP. When you actually take into account the cases where you'd want it, it does diminish somewhat. So let's get into it first. Immunity to freeze and chill during flask effect, removes freeze and chill on use. Immunity to curse during flask effect, removes curses on use. 50% reduced duration, cannot be stunned during flask effect. You see it as a base, 2.5. I'm assuming 50% reduced duration is just a set roll. You can't get anything higher or lower than that. I would assume it would make sense. It's a nice round even number. This is without quality on it, so you quality it up, you get some flask effect duration of the tree, of which, there are quite a few good sources. So you see you've got 12% flask effect duration here. You have 20% flask effect duration here. And then you have a 8% and a 8% in Pathfinder. So once you've picked up all of this, once you've qualified up your flask, once you have Poacher's Mark, some more, easy flask generation through some other means, you can quite reliably keep up the buff 100% of the time. In which case you're looking at, freeze immune, curse immune not being needed on other flask slots, and potentially for CI builds not being reliant on Eye of Chowla or being kind of YOLO with, well, I've got 50% flask avoidance. So you go, great, well, this seems really powerful. It's also a silver flask. A lot of people are running silver flasks now, so, it sort of bandits everything into one nice unique flask. Obviously, you start thinking about Pathfinder, and this becomes really, really good. Well, Pathfinder, funnily enough, is sort of where this flask starts to fall down a little bit. Now, this isn't true for all Pathfinder builds, but most Pathfinder builds that people are talking about going forward will be Master Surgeon and Master Alchemist. Remember, in Prophecy, you'll be having 8 Ascendancy points to play with. But Master Alchemist does give you immune to ailment status ailments during flask effect. So, you're frozen, you press a flask, you're not getting frozen anymore, right? If you have a flask up, you're not getting frozen. You should always have a flask up as a Pathfinder. So, you end up instantly having, the whole freeze thing not being relevant on your flask. You also need to take into account that as a Pathfinder, you have all status elements removed and all bleeds removed. So, outside of your unique flask, you probably have stuff like warding, wardening, adrenaline, stuff like that on your Quicksilvers and your Onslaught flasks already. So then it's kind of like, well, really then all I'm getting is the option to maybe run one more unique flask and the stun immune. Because realistically, you're probably going to use a Vessel, let's say it's Ziri's Promise, say a Taste of Hate, maybe a Roomies. Okay? Then you run an Onslaught flask. Well, you have your Onslaught flask with Curse Immune on it anyway, or a Quicksilver. So it's like you're kind of getting one thing, maybe 2 things. Not all builds will run all 4 of those. So you nearly get all of these effects anyway on a Pathfinder. It is powerful. I think it's really good. I really like this unique. But it's kind of interesting how with Pathfinder it actually becomes maybe less powerful. Still, I think this will have a lot of use and is easy to have near maximum uptime on outside of Pathfinder, just with something like Poacher's Mark in the mix on the Flask Effect Duration in the tree. So I really like this flask, and I'm sure it will definitely see a fair amount of usage in Prophecy. Now, this is another recently, last few hours recently revealed sword. The Hiltless Reaver sword. It's a reference to a weapon from Demon Souls, I believe. And first off, can I just say thank you for revealing this weapon with the top roll, with quality, and the bottom roll. There have been a few other weapons which have been recently revealed, and they're incredibly hard to evaluate because I don't know the rolls. I remember I was streaming when the new sort of support cold bow was announced, and people said, "Oh, what do you think?" And the same with the claw. I'm like, well, I can't really tell you. I don't know if that's a top roll or bottom roll. It's very hard to evaluate uniques in general, but especially weapons without the roll. So GGG, please and thank you. Do more reveals like this going forward, where whoever's doing the reveal, you give them both a top and a bottom roll. But anyway, so it's a 2-handed sword. It has pretty good top end, pretty good crit chance. Socket jumps for level 1 blood magic. This is not as amazing as you would assume. Thanks to the easy accessibility to Mana Leech, you can get it in Berserker now, you can get it in Duelist, you can get it over here as well. Most attack-based builds don't really have issues with sustain anymore. Obviously, there are some outliers. You have stuff like Dom Blow, stuff with very high mana costs, but Dom Blow doesn't really see that much play. Cyclone, you kind of just leech through it, maybe sort of Elrond Jury. There will be some cases where you really value that blood magic highly, but in the current state of the game, it isn't that amazing. If it was released maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, when it was much harder to sustain and much more builds are going down the blood magic route, then this would be a much more powerful item, but still, it's nice and it fits the flavor of the weapon. So you have the, flat fizz roll, the flat crit roll, and then you get the interesting part. Reflects 100 fizz damage to you from your attacks. This has been clarified in a Reddit thread by the guy who made the item. That is per hit per enemy, so that's something quite important. You can mitigate it by percent fizz reduction, or the Slayer's new 50% reduced reflected damage, which if you haven't seen, yep, they've updated most of the Ascendancies, and Slayer has done very well out of the rework. Now, it will also apparently be scaled by Abyssus, which makes sense. I assume it would also be scaled by the percent damage in Berserker. According to Mark, this will not trigger Vol Molten Shell, but it will trigger cast on damage taken. It won't trigger on hit effects, like stuff which triggers when your character is hit, because it's counted as reflect damage. This would also mean that you would be able to reduce the damage through a Sibyl Lament ring, which is 30% reduced. So let's say you're a Slayer, and for some reason you were doing like crazy fizz stacking, you wanted the Slayer 50% and a Sibyl's. You probably would never do that, but let's just say theoretically you did. You'd have 80% taken off the 100, and then start to think about armor, endurance charges, maybe you're a Juggernaut. Like, it really isn't that much of an issue, even if you're not a Slave, if you're not a Juggernaut, even if you have very minimal armor, so you're an evasion build. The second you start factoring in either life leech or life gain on hit, even life regen, it isn't that scary. Obviously, if you're going to cyclade into 100 mobs with no form of regen, no form of leech, no form of life gain on hit, and absolutely no armor, yeah, that's probably not the best idea in the world. But, you know. Has +2 to weapon range, which is kind of nice. A lot of the builds I see doing the whole two-hand crit sword things, they tend to be like Lightning Strike, Frost Blade, Spectral Throw. Maybe Lacerate, since Lacerate is a new skill coming, which is usable with swords and axes, including two-handed swords and axes. I'm not sure how well Lacerate scales off the +2 to weapon range. I certainly know that Lightning Strike, I mean, people just use the projectiles. Frostblades, sort of. Spectro, definitely not. Well, sort of. It's like, there's a lot of, like, sort of cases with the weapon range, but the weapon range isn't that amazing. It's more helpful for stuff like Cyclone. So, all in all, it's a fairly interesting weapon. I really like the fact that it has good damage on it. Like, it's definitely a well-rolled unique, but it isn't better than a rare. You can get rares better than this. And I really like items which count as, like, they'll get you into maps and they can take you to high-ish maps. But, you know, once you start farming, you know, the 9s, the 10s, you're starting to build some off, like, you know, maybe I'm going to craft myself my own exquisite blade, or I'm going to go buy one off PoE trade. So I really like that. You can equip it at quite a low level. 59 is pretty low level for such a nice top end. And, yeah, overall, I just really like it. Now, I do quite like doing these sort of short, unique formats. I know there have been more items which have been revealed previously, but they're a bit old hat now. I do want to do a full review of all of the fated items when that comes out. I'm assuming we'll get it either during Prophecy. Hopefully we'll get it before so people can plan builds around it. But, yeah. Anyway, I'm Tarke. As always, you can catch me live on Twitch. I am taking a little hiatus at the moment because I've been pretty unwell. I'm just resting up before Prophecy. But don't worry, guys. The second Prophecy goes live, I'll be live with it. But yeah, hope you have a good day. Hopefully these items are interesting. And once again, good job lifting and the designer of these two uniques. Stuff looks cool. See you around. Bye-bye.